some of the things we continue to place a high value on our staff culture. I think that's probably one of the key things. So I learned from talking to a couple of my predecessors that had started schools from scratch that it wasn't a one-off thing. We don't do something in the first induction of the first term of the first year that we're in existence and say that's our staff culture established. So we've learned a few things along the way, and that was one of them, that it's something that's ongoing. It's something that's front of mind day in and day out, and it's something that needs to be quite deliberate, so not something you hope to happen well. So we've done some things that we try to do on a daily basis or a weekly basis or an annual basis that increases the chances of having a great staff culture. A couple of key things. One is we communicate, some people would say too often, about what we're about. So what's our vision, our direction of travel? What do we value? What's important to us? There are formal times when I do that. So obviously at the start of the year, we do an induction period, talk about our vision, our direction of travel, what our purpose is, what our core professional norms or permission to play values are that we run our staff by. I have a formal all hands meeting 4 times a year, so once a term, do the same thing again. Now, it's not the same content or the same ideas are there. Obviously, the fact that you've got to do it constantly forces the leader to think of ways of talking about this, but you're also bouncing off whatever's on top of the organisation as well. Fundamentally, if you want to take something away from that, it's about being relentless and deliberate in the design and communication of what you're wanting from your culture.
So I think one of the things that really worked when trying to get commitment from a new staff is obviously you need to have a plan and a way of doing things, and you can't bring them on board unless you have that direction. So we always say te toia te haumātia, which is that whole idea of making sure you have a plan and a way that you do things. And we really needed to know our why and have real passion and enthusiasm and belief in what we were doing. Because when you hire people who believe what you believe, they'll work tirelessly for you. So I think that was really important. One thing that we'd learned from new school visits that we'd done is that if your staff have those sort of parameters, they'll feel really safe and know that they can move forward with the changes that are coming.
So what we did, I set out some grid squares in our hall about areas of spaces that we were conceptually working with. We got the architects to provide us with big A1 sheets of a proposed floor plan, and we established what we called vision groups. And we had those vision groups working on each of the floor levels of the school, looking at how we would configure our ideal learning environments. And if you come into Western Springs College, you'll notice that one of the parameters that we've worked on is one big building for the whole school, maximizing open space outside. But each of the 3 floor levels looks completely different. And that's because the vision groups working on those in those curriculum areas made their decisions based on what they felt was their best practice. We then had a whole bunch of suppliers come in with various furnishing styles and all the rest of it. And we had little models and little cutouts and all the rest of it, and had our staff working collaboratively in the hall on big tables with big sheets of A1s, trialing out different furniture options, working out what they thought would be best. A couple of our old prefabs, we knocked some walls out between adjoining prefabs and created ourselves a little trial open learning environment best we could, and started practicing with some of those furnishing styles as well, to the point where staff were able to feel invested in what it is that we were designing and planning. Because, as a profession, we know what we know, and what we've known as single cell classrooms, we've all been taught in them, we've all taught in them. And that's always, of course, the default position. So to say to the staff, no, we're not going to do that, was a gutsy call for us, because we weren't a new school starting off that could attract people in.
Building relationships with the staff was really, really important. Connecting with them, valuing what they brought to the team, knowing them and what they needed to be successful. And this mindset, like we had a team culture and mindset that we've developed, but one of the schools we'd visited talked about this concept of playing in the sandpit. So that's something that we also always talk about, that things are trial and error. We can reiterate as many times as we need to. And it's hard sometimes for staff to feel like they're not going to get into trouble for making mistakes. So that was sort of a mindset we had to build on with many of our teachers. Okay, so the biggest thing is the whānau kōrero. So every family that enrolls has a 1 hour whānau kōrero with either myself or my 2 DPs. And that's that time just really sets us up for success. We get to know, obviously we share our stories because they have journeyed to New Zealand, and most of us have if we're not tangata whenua. And then they have the opportunity then to really ask all the questions that they have. I guess another thing that we've used really successfully is social media. So we have a really good, when we enroll a family, we make them log into Hero. We have to bring that vision to life versus the everyday experiences that you have in a school. So we have to constantly, one of the things we've had to do is constantly revisit and reteach our purpose, our vision, our goals. I always say that learners in our community means our parents as well. So if they don't know something or they're unsure about something, then it's our job to teach them. It's not our job to just complain about the community and say, oh, they don't understand, because yeah, they don't understand. So that's been something we've used is, okay, if we see a need, we invite parents in and say, we're going to talk about this because there's been a lot of questions about it.
It was an evolution of teaching more design-based thinking and a move into everyone being empowered to understand the process of good facility design. It doesn't have to be educational. It can be in health. It can be in aged care. It doesn't matter. It's about the human relationship with the built environment and how it goes backwards and forwards. And I mentioned earlier we had our soft systems worked out. It was showing the staff in design language, the soft systems are your curriculum, pedagogy, decision points, timetabling, things you can't touch and hold. And the hard systems are the buildings, the furniture, the 3D things you can pick up. And so we said quite early on, and it's still a mantra now, for every adjustment to a soft system, there must be a corresponding adjustment to a hard system and vice versa. And if you introduce or change hard systems, there's got to be a corresponding shift in soft systems. And when things aren't quite working, it's usually because the hard and soft systems have become disconnected. And you will see that in facilities where people are barricading themselves into making single cell rooms out of furniture and putting up partitions and bookcases. Their soft system is not the way that they're working is not matching the facility. So of course they're forced to change the hard system in any way of improvising to try and get some mental calm back to their world, because this schema of learning has been so disrupted by having such a mismatch between their understanding of the soft systems and what's being offered with the working with hard systems. And that's a great tragedy. And I believe so much more attention needs to be focused on everyone within an organisation understanding that powerful dynamic between hard and soft systems. Similar workshops run here at school with our community. Julia ran several of those sorts of visioning for future schools workshops with our parent groups as well in the mornings and in the evenings. And we started to emerge the next step, which is once you've got your pedagogy in place, the soft systems, then you have to actually prepare a brief for the architects, which talks to them in the pieces that they don't need to know the instructional detail of our curriculum, but they need to know the vibe or the, you know. And so we spent a long time, probably about 18 months of working on the education brief. The brief should paint a picture that captures the essence of the community and of the pedagogy.
The week before we were due to open, we got the keys on the Friday, and the Sunday the board had decided that we'd have a community open day. So basically, we opened up for about 3 hours. We had hundreds of people come through, hundreds, and there was a significant drop off in questions about the spaces. Like if this was the peak, it just went like that, almost overnight, because parents could see the space. Because in their head, whatever picture they'd conceived in their head, was obviously quite different than what they were experiencing. So physically touching, seeing, feeling the spaces as much as is possible is critical. So when we've been open for 3-4 years, maybe, what we had learned is that as the newness starts to wash off a little bit, and some community were asking a bit more specific questions about what learning looked like in our spaces. And that started to come from families that hadn't started the journey with us. And so what we learned through a series of mistakes on our part mainly is that we hadn't taken the opportunity to look at I mean, this sounds very obvious in hindsight, but as a community grows, obviously new people will come into it and they won't have been with you since day one. And we were like that. We were a farm before we became 900 houses. So we didn't re-communicate our vision for learning. We didn't re-communicate how we were interpreting New Zealand curriculum and what that looked like, given that these were open, flexible, contemporary spaces. And so we had to do that better. And we did it in a couple of ways. I mean, the obvious one schools will go to is a parent meeting, but one of the strategies we came up with, there were 2 deliberate strategies we came up. One was to be overly active on Facebook. So it was a very practical strategy. We made a roster for all the senior staff. We had to put up 3 posts a week. They were all to do with what was going on at Shotover. You know, so if you had no other communication with Shotover other than watching our Facebook feed, then over a week, over a month, you get a pretty good idea about some of the stuff that was happening from a learning point of view. And it just changes the narrative, really. Second thing is we designed what we call the Nature of Learning workshop. And this was done on the back that most parents, their idea of learning is whatever their experience was in their own formal education. And they may or may not have read some books about learning. Clearly, we know a lot more about learning than we did when I was at school, for example. So we ran these workshops. They were over 2 nights, over 1 night a week for two weeks. And we started at quite a high level. We looked at themselves as individuals. We used the HPDI thinking preference stuff to get a sense of how people can look at the same thing with a bit of diversity and different perspectives. We talked about I got them to tell a story about what was successful for them at school, just pick a story, one thing. But we wanted to give them a real sense that actually this has been thought through and is well connected.